Thousands of farmers are, as we speak, closing in on Westminster to vent their fury over changes to make them start paying inheritance tax on properties worth over £1 million.
And they're going to be joined by one very high-profile farmer, Jeremy Clarkson. He's leaving diddly squats to make his way to Westminster, despite the fact his doctor apparently told him not to do it.
After his heart surgery, he's been told to leave it, but he's gone.
He says the government wants to cleanse the countryside of farmers, and he feels so impassioned about it. He's going to be there today. Well, joining us now is Bill Rammell. Now, he is a former Labour minister who says only the wealthiest of landowners are going to be hit by this inheritance tax change. That is fiercely contested by a young farmer, Rebecca Wilson. Rebecca's farm has been in her family for almost 100 years and says farmers are at breaking point. Very good morning to you both.
Morning both. Hi.
So, Rebecca, are you one of those very, very wealthy farmers who are in farming for the tax dodge, the avoidance, and you can easily afford to pay a 20% inheritance tax when you inherit the farm?
Well, I wish I was one of those very wealthy farmers. For us at home on the farm, so we're based in North Yorkshire, our profitability on the farm has been struggling for many years now. We're really constrained by things like the supply chain, and ultimately we're price takers. So the market decides what we get for our products. Right. It doesn't cover costs of production, particularly in recent years with really high input costs. And ultimately, we don't mind paying tax, but if we don't have the cash flow in our business relative to the size of assets, we're really going to struggle. Your
family has had this farm since, what, 1928? Getting on for 100 years. You brought some pictures in. I think this is you as a little girl. Is this with your parents?
Yeah, with my mum and my twin sister, Rosie. OK,
so there's no way that you could be accused of sort of buying the farm as a tax loophole, a tax dodge. It's in the family. It's in the blood, basically.
Exactly, yes.
If the awful thing were to happen and your parents were to pass away this year, once the new rates are effective, would it really mean that straight away you'd have to put the for sale sign up in the fields?
Well, for us on our farm, as I mentioned, the profitability, we do not have the cash in our business to pay, for us, nearly a £1 million tax bill. And I appreciate that we are being allowed to pay it over 10 years, and there is interest on that, and we simply do not have the money there to pay it. The only option for us would be to sell a portion of the farm, which, again, puts the financial viability at risk.
Okay. Bill Rammell, this is the point, isn't it? That we rely on our farmers. We want to produce as much food in this country as possible. We don't want to rely on imports and whatever prices that might cost us. So we rely on Rebecca's family farm. If she inherits and has to pay 20% inheritance tax, she's going to have to sell part of the farm. That's not good for the UK.
Well, look, I've got the greatest respect for farmers. They work damned hard and they make a major contribution to society. But I'd really urge farmers to look at the detail of these tax changes, because I genuinely think the reaction has been way out of kilter.
You described it as hysterical.
Yeah, because it's completely...
She's not hysterical.
No, she's not. And I'm not sure you'll be affected in the way that you're describing. But it's completely out of kilter with the facts. This isn't a tax on farmers per se, it's a tax on the very wealthiest. Don't listen to me. Paul Johnson from the rigorously independent Institute for Fiscal Studies said the reaction from farmers is massively overblown and they still get a better tax deal than anyone else in society.
Have you worked on a farm? Do you come at this with experience?
Well, when I was a constituency MP, I had 7 farms in my constituency that I worked very hard with and lobbied on their behalf.
But, I mean, I wonder if you're better at assessing the value of Rebecca's farm than she is.
Well, OK, let's come to this. And firstly, let's make the point that if you're a married couple, you can pass on £3 million completely tax-free. You only then pay a reduced rate of inheritance tax and you've got 10 years to pay it off. The estimates, the Treasury estimates 500 out of 209,000
Yes, and the farmers counter that with 70,000. Yeah. So there's a huge discrepancy. 500 compared to 70,000.
And, Richard, that's the Country Landowners Association, which acknowledge that their figures should be treated with caution. Look at independent...
Still a big gap, isn't it?
But DEFRA's figures suggest 66% of farms. DEFRA's own figures, which are at odds with the Treasury. And actually, if there is confusion over figures, how on earth do you expect farmers to be confident to invest in our businesses for the future, to pass it on for the next generation? We work extremely hard, which I'm very grateful that you acknowledged, but why should we keep working hard for less than minimum wage, long hours, very, very difficult working conditions? We're doing it to keep food on the shelves and as cheaply as possible for consumers.
But Rebecca, let's come to the DEFRA figures, because the Secretary of State has said the NFU have completely distorted the DEFRA figures, that they believe that the vast majority of farmers will be unaffected. If there's a real concern about the figures, then sit down with the government and bottom it out. But
We've tried to... The government don't consult.
Hold on, Rebecca. The old tax regime had massive discrepancies within it. 2/3 of what was a tax break went to the wealthiest landowners in the country, people worth £5 million or more, and 50% went to people who weren't even traditional farmers, people who just got into farming to get a tax break.
Isn't there something rather unpleasant about the language which is being used here? I mean, you have used the word hysterical, and you've also said you think farmers should look at the detail. Well, a lot of farmers have said that they have. They've sat down, they've looked at the detail, and they say it's a nightmare, and that their families, when they die, are going to lose the farm. So you say they should look at the detail, but they say that they have.
Well, then I'd urge with respect they look again, because, no, hold on, a married couple can pass on £3 million, tax-free. The average value of a farm in the UK is £2.3 million. So by the very nature of that, the vast majority are not going to be affected.
Well, as long as they're all of those are run by married couples, which they won't be.
Yeah, but there's still then a significant tax break for farmers per se that no one else in society...
Are you reassured, Rebecca, that if... Because your parents are married, presumably, that they can pass on £3 million, which means that the large proportion of the value of the farm would be covered by tax relief?
Well, I think it's typical to pull out the headline figures of you'll be OK for £3 million, because that really grabs the public's attention, and really paints the picture of farmers as millionaires. But ultimately, and my farm is one of those, like many farms across the country, £3 million is only realisable in very specific circumstances. It relies on the person who's handing down the farm to live for 7 years without actually living on the farm, without drawing an income from the farm. So the specific circumstances will not fit for everybody.
Rebecca, you could, of course, avoid inheritance tax completely if your parents gifted you the farm 7 years before they died. Is there any possibility of that happening in your family?
There is some possibility, but actually it relies on people, of my kind of parents' age and older, having had the money to afford to put away for a pension, for example, to rent a house or buy a house. And most farmers simply do not have that spare income to leave the farmhouse.
Bill, do you think...
But you know what? What I learnt in government is that tax and spend is a zero-sum game. And if we're not going to levy this tax through inheritance tax, then I think the opponents have actually got to say what other taxes on poorer working people should go up, or what other cuts in public...
Do we not count as poor working people?
But that's not Rebecca's job, to come up with an alternative tax. Rebecca's job is to defend farmers.
I'm not personalising it to Rebecca. I'm saying...
But you said opponents, and we've got an opponent here who's the farmer.
Across the board, if they don't agree with this tax, need to say, well, what other taxes should go up?
No, that's not their job.
Hard-working people.
That's the Chancellor's job.
No,
I think we're hard-working people. I find it completely offensive to not be in the bracket of a hard-working person.
Of course you're hard-working.
Most farmers do not draw minimum wage from their farming businesses. Yes, you might say they get some benefits from being part of a business, and some of those are now going, for example, pickups. But other people in their job perhaps get a company car, holiday allowance, healthcare, a pension, and farmers are not in that position because we do not have the...
But, Rebecca, I heard you say that you'll be affected to the tune of £1 million of inheritance tax. A quick calculation suggests to me that that means the value of your farm is worth £10 million. Now, you've worked hard for that. Your family have worked hard for that. But I don't see why, passing on that level of wealth, you should be treated differently to everybody else in society.
How did you come to 10 million?
£1 million inheritance tax above the £3 million threshold is about £200,000.
But Rebecca disputes that £3 million threshold.
Why?
Well, it's only realisable in specific circumstances. So to use the headline figure of £3 million is really skewing perspectives on the topic.
If your parents are married and they claim the £1 million allowance, and then the additional £1 million
And they have to survive.
They get to £3 million.
All right, moving away from the detail, does this whole argument, whichever side of the argument one might stand on, demonstrate a fundamental disconnect between central government and the countryside? There just doesn't seem to be a meeting point, a meeting of minds.
No, I don't think that's true. You know,
I
think if farmers were coming at this saying that the bureaucracy around the grants they have to apply for is far too complicated, I'd have massive sympathy, and the government understands that and needs to reform it.
Do you think that there's a disconnect?
I think we're completely distorting the issue here going on to grants. You know, the basic payment scheme actually, for me, subsidised the costs of food production, therefore kept food cheap.
Sure.
The sustainable farming incentive is not a direct replacement for the payments we were getting under the basic payment scheme. We have to put inputs in to achieve ambitious, you know, we're fine with that, ambitious environmental aims. It does, to some extent, put food security at risk for some actions under the sustainable farming incentive. And I think it's completely missing the point to move it on to, albeit that's an issue, to move away from inheritance tax, APR, the things announced in the budget around, you know, a carbon tax and fertiliser.
We've never seen protests like this before in this country. We've seen them in countries like France, where the farmers don't take any nonsense from central government.
Richard. Go back to 2001 and the fuel protests.
OK.
And there were equal protests by farmers and lorry drivers. And I tell you this, and I don't put the NFU in this category, but some of the talk from a minority of farmers about blockades and disrupting the food chain. Go back to 2001, the farmers very quickly lost public support when they went down that road, and I would urge against it.
Are you planning on blockading the food chain?
Well, ultimately, what we're doing today is the first step. If we don't get any progress with that, and farmers don't want to stop food getting to consumers. We know that it's not their doing. However, we are at breaking point. We are at our wits' end, and actually, public support now is on side. We don't want to break that.
OK.
We're desperate.
Thank you both. We'll let you go because you've got a protest to attend.
And then you've got to go back to the snow.
Yes.
Have you got a box snow up there this morning?
There is a bit up there, yeah.
I bet there is, OK, both. Thank you for coming in.
Indeed.